Hello everybody, we are in week 3 where we will be covering chapter 2, social cognition. So let's do the rundown of what to expect for this week. I have your to-do list here. You're going to want to take a look over the objectives for the chapter. Good to do this before you read the chapter. You can click here for a podcast where I go over each one of these items and kind of talk a little bit about what each entails. And then it would be great if you had this near you or printed this out as you're reading through the chapter, as well as when you're covering the lecture slides, so you can kind of compare that and use it to make sure that you are able to answer each one of these questions after you've done the reading. So good to overview it first and then read, and then go back in and plug in answers to everything after you've read, and that can serve as your study guide for the exam. Here are your slides for chapter 2, and again, feel free to print those out in notes version and have them next to you when you read. That way you can bridge concepts from the lecture to the actual reading. I am heavier on the text reading, but the lecture slides correspond nicely with the text reading. But obviously, as you're reading through the text, it gives a lot more examples and a lot more information than I'm going to go ahead and put on the slides. The slides are meant to highlight key points, not cover everything exhaustively. So your best bet for studying still is the textbook, as well as these objectives up here. I've put a PDF of chapter 2. This will be the last time I give you a PDF, just in case some of you still don't yet have your textbook. You can use this. This will be the last time I do that. And that really is just to give you a little extra time in case you don't have your text. I've included the article here. It says for homework 2. You can just ignore that. I'm going to delete that off of there, but it's for your discussion. So the discussion posts really just incorporate everything you're learning from chapter 2 as well as the article. So you're going to need to read both in order to do the discussion post for this week. So we'll talk about that in just a second. I've also posted some videos for you this week that have to do with social cognition. What would you do? Bike theft is one of those. A video about implicit bias. This is like a funny spoof that Conan did about how we can be biased about certain things and not even realize it. It's called implicit bias. We'll take a look more at that later in the semester when we cover stereotypes, prejudice, racism, discrimination, and when we look at just how much implicit bias is an underlying concept in that. But it really is an underlying concept in a lot of what we do in our day-to-day. I've also given you a couple videos on heuristics. So the chapter talks about these cognitive shortcuts that we take called heuristics, how we rely on them to process information quickly and arrive at a judgment or a conclusion or a decision, sometimes without having had all the data. Okay, and we do that to save ourselves time, but we also do it to save brain capacity. But the downfall is that heuristics can lead us astray. They're not always accurate because we're relying on our own experiences, which may be limited or slanted or biased. They can lead us astray. So there's different kinds of heuristics that we use. That the book talks about: availability heuristic and representativeness heuristic, base heuristics. And so these videos give you some examples of those. Just again, this is just so you have more examples of what that looks like out in the real world. How would I use these heuristics that you're talking about in my day-to-day life? So I put a video there, and then this one covers a little bit more of the representativeness heuristic. Okay, and then your discussion for this week It deals with pluralistic ignorance. So the reading, Article 9, specifically addresses this concept of pluralistic ignorance. It's also talked about in the chapter. But I want you to answer the question, can the effects of pluralistic ignorance on people's private beliefs and behaviors somehow be minimized? According to research, how? So you need to know what pluralistic ignorance is, and you'll read about that in article number 9. And once you have an idea about what it is, how does it affect people's beliefs? And is there any way that we can combat it? Is there any way we can minimize it? And so here you're not giving your own opinion, but you're going to the research and you're going, okay, well, let me see what research says about pluralistic ignorance and how we can possibly minimize it. And think about what you read in the main chapter too, heuristics, all you read about social cognition, cognitive shortcuts that we take. How does all of that affect it? So you might have some examples there that you can throw in. And then suppose you were a parent and you didn't want your child to be unduly influenced by the misperceived norms of what others were actually doing. So, right, a lot of times kids think, well, everyone's doing this, right? They see something as a norm, and then that drives their behavior. I have to do it then because everyone else is, and I'm going to be weird if I don't. But are they perceiving reality? Is it really the norm? Is everyone really doing that thing? Or does it just seem that way? If we were to actually poll kids, students, children, what would we find? Would we find that we were correct in our norm assumption, or would we find that we're not correct? Well, unfortunately, we can't always do that. We can't always poll to see if our ideas are in line with what the actual occurrences are. So if you were a parent, how would you deal with that? You know, what advice might you have for your child as to how not to be influenced by misperceived norms? So in answering both these questions, you just want to make sure to do a nice job of explaining your answers by using support. And your support should be coming from the textbook and coming from the article that you read, okay? And of course, if you want to reference videos, if you ever, are watching these videos and something stood out to you that you just remember from the video, definitely you can throw that in there. Always cite your sources. So remember to be using the Cite as you write document, which is in the Start Here menu. Maybe I'll actually post it down here for you too, which is just a document to help you know how to cite correctly in APA format. So again, we're always citing by author's last name and date of the publication. That's always a must. If you are using a direct quote, which I really don't think you should, it's not good writing to use direct quotes. You should use them very sparingly, if at all. But if you happen to throw one in there, you need to also cite the page number. So you'd have the author's last names, the date, page number, and your quote would need to be in quotation marks. Okay. If you're citing page numbers and you have no quotation marks, then I don't know what material is a quote, right? But if you give me page numbers, I'm going to assume there's a quote in there somewhere. I'm going to be looking for that. So the best rule of thumb is don't use quotes. Instead, when you read something, summarize it and put it into your own words, and then just cite the source of where that idea came from. Okay, so I hope that is clear for discussion. You also want to go back and look at any feedback I gave you on week 2's discussion. So those are graded. Those will be graded, I should say, Monday, Tuesday-ish is kind of when I go through and do all that grading. So as soon as your grade pops up for week 2 discussion, you can click in there, and any comments that I have, you'll want to read those. If I've given you any areas for improvement, make sure you look that over. And you want to do this before you tackle the week 3 discussion, because if you're doing something wrong or you're missing something, You want to make sure you don't keep doing the same thing wrong. So definitely take a look there. I won't always give detailed feedback. Sometimes I will just give you a grade. I might say, 20 out of 25 points. Well, what happened? What did I do? And you'll have to look at the grade rubric. So again, the grade rubric is posted in the Start Here menu, and it's a rubric that shows you what I look for in a discussion post, and it breaks it down by points. So you can look and see, well, I got 20 points. What did I miss? And you can look to see what elements are listed there that perhaps you missed. And I do this because I'm not always going to be able to give detailed feedback. In fact, most weeks I won't. Just because of the sheer number of students I have. And that's what the rubric's for, really is to guide you. Okay, once you're done with that, you have your first exam this week. It is covering chapters 1 and 2. It's 30 questions, multiple choice. They're worth 2 points each. You have 30 minutes to complete the test. It is no notes, no book. If you're trying to use notes and trying to use your book, number one, you shouldn't be, but number two, it's going to take you a lot longer and you're going to find that you run out of time. So really be well prepared as you sit down to take your test. You should have your concepts, in your head. You want to have spent a fair amount of time studying before you tackle that test. The test will close Sunday at 11:59 p.m. So give yourself ample time. You don't want to start the test at 11:30. That's cutting it pretty close. So the test will close automatically at 11:59. If you're in the middle of it and it turns 11:59, the exam will close and you won't be able to finish. So don't want that to happen to you. So make sure to leave enough time. Make sure your Wi-Fi is reliable, that you're in a good place where you have Wi-Fi and internet, and maybe even a backup if that's a possibility for you, a backup option of where you could go. I always tell students, if you can, to take your test in the library at one of the computers, and bring your laptop too, if that's a possibility. That way you have two sources, just to be prepared, okay? And again, remember as you're going through this week that I do have office hours via Zoom. So if you'd like to talk about any of the material or you have any questions, just email me and let me know if you'd like to set up a Zoom. We can do a Zoom chat. I usually do 15-minute increments, but sometimes if I don't have any other students, I have more time than that. So just email me and let me know if you would like to do that. Thanks, everyone.